All right. Good evening, everyone. Dr. John here. We are roadside in Encinitas, overlooking the ocean, getting near sunset. Sun's probably going to drop in just a few minutes. I'm not sure if we'll be able to pick it up on the computer camera, but I will give it a try for you all. Let's check this out. Can we see it? Can we see it? Where is it? Back more this way. Yeah, that's not going to work. Yep, sorry. We'll figure out some better setups and maybe get some better tech as the channel grows and advances. So, the video this evening, we're going to explore depression from an existential lens. I think we'll be more in the realm of existential psychology with follow-up video perhaps on the philosophical side. This is actually my second attempt trying to record this video. The other night I tried and the audio didn't get recorded, and I figured out why. It's because for some reason YouTube and my Mac is using my iPhone microphone for the audio. And so the other night my iPhone was put away. It wasn't out. So no audio happened. So I had to completely scratch that one. So this is our take two. So as usual, the method for discussion is we check out ChatGPT and just put in a search related to the topic of interest, and then I wrap off of that. Why do I do that? I do that just for simplicity's sake because I'm just trying to have fun here, and for me to take time to research all the material, get all the books together, and all that. It's just not the goal. Really, I'm just trying to enhance my knowledge and hopefully offer some knowledge out there to you. So I always give the caveat: ChatGPT might not be perfect, but I've been studying existential psych and philosophy for about 2 decades now. So I can sort of, in my clinical psychology training, I can sort of suss out if there's anything in the content that doesn't seem quite right. And I'm not going to agree with all of it. And I'll try to discuss those points as well. So let's jump in. This is definitely going to be part one because there's a lot of material to cover. So we'll try to do part two tomorrow. Hopefully, we can get out in the daylight. So, when we're thinking about existential psychology, we want to reiterate the common themes. This isn't comprehensive, but core themes: freedom, responsibility, meaning, isolation, death, and authenticity. And I sort of think of those as central features to hold in awareness, to track, for me, kind of track day by day, am I in touch with those, and how am I working with them to live a more full and more complete and more joyous life. All right. So, conceptual foundations here. Depression can be thought of as an existential crisis. That's kind of how I conceptualized my depression decades ago, and there's certainly relics of it that come up, and I view it more from this existential mode than like a clinical symptom type mode, because I feel like the depression, it doesn't impair me. It doesn't stop me from living my life. I'm sure there's subtle things here and there, and definitely in my 20s, much more severe impact. I mean, I was still, earning decent grades in college, going to college. I think at one point I had 3 jobs, and I was a hard worker back then. I once worked like 50 some days straight at these 3 different jobs, no days off. So that's kind of, my roots back east in Pittsburgh, Steel City, blue collar, just kind of grind away, grind away, grind away. So um, that was all the while I was kind of having this crisis. I think it was more linked up for me with meaning and life path, and also like trying to find my way into that authenticity for a very in ways authentic existence when it came to um, friendships. At that time I had a few good friends. I didn't really quite feel the college scene that I was in was working for me. But friends outside of that were great. I was doing my thing in terms of, listening to the music I like. I had a wonderful Jeep Wrangler back then. Used to love driving that thing. So there's definitely aspects of authenticity there, but I think really I was caught up in trying to figure out this notion of meaning, and definitely those elements of isolation. Okay, so I sort of digressed there, but existential crisis. So depression, I think we have to be real about in the sense of acknowledging some biological foundations as well. Neurotransmitters in the brain potentially playing a role in mood states, cognitive dysfunction, of course. So depression is really driven by cognitive distortions in the sense of that this is going to be a major oversimplification, but um, how can I simplify this? Depression, I feel like there's an element of not being in at peace with perhaps the past and future possibilities, maybe feeling like a pessimism or pessimistic about that. Um, gonna pause while the coaster goes by, the train. So, and the cognitive disorder, there tends to be very polarized thinking, the amplification of negatives, a discounting of positives. Good things kind of get filtered out, get caught up in like hindsight bias in terms of like judging our past self with current knowledge, so we don't feel as good about past decisions that we made. So that comes into that lack of acceptance, lack of radical acceptance. Probably have to do a video about that idea later. Um, Also, there's a tendency to be kind of in that caught in the negativity bias, which is essentially the negative experiences that we have in our lives tend to be like thorns in our side, if you will. A lot of good that's happening around us. So let's move on. So, the existential standpoint, kind of having this realization or an encounter with the givens, meaninglessness, mortality, isolation, and freedom. So I kind of hit on different elements of those. I didn't mention the mortality piece, but thinking about when I was in a space of depression, there was this like sadness, grief that was within me around the ever changing flow of things, which ultimately was kind of like making its way toward an endpoint. That kind of like all things arise and pass, all things are changing. So that can be hard to accept, and particularly reflecting on one's own death being the ultimate element of a finite existence, and those that we love, of course. And I was also really, I think, like really kind of saddened by the grief that other people might feel, for the loss of a loved one. So making peace with those. In terms of freedom, I think freedom ties in the sense of like there's not choices being made. There's a stagnation. There's a stuckness that happens. There's a fear of acting, a resistance to taking ownership. Okay, I think those all tie into that notion of freedom. Isolation from an existential standpoint, that's kind of more the gap between my existence and the existence of the other. That's what they mean by isolation. I'm going to unpack that further down the line. So let's let that be for now. A loss of meaning and possibility. So when we have an experience where we have a like a blow to our sense of purpose, of meaning, or I think when we're in a struggle of defining what that is, we can get into that challenge of meaninglessness. On the far extreme, perhaps I'm going to venture a guess that a far extreme of that would be like a nihilistic kind of view. Um, Anyways, I don't want to go too far down that trail, but also diminished possibilities for the future. Thinking negative stuff now is the way it's always going to be. Therefore, not getting into what's the term? Learned helplessness, hopelessness, despair, etc. And the sense of, I mentioned this, being stuck and cut off from authentic choices. Okay, a restricted being in the world. So we're living what I kind of call in a condensed reality, if you will, in the sense that we're making ourselves small, in the sense where we're not expressing an openness to the world, openness to relationships, openness to taking on work, um, challenging ourselves toward new projects and new possibilities. And there's definitely a heaviness that comes with it, and a lack of vitality that is in there as well. So definitely have relics of that kind of crop in. People always tell me like, I don't smile a lot, or like I'm very monotone in how I talk. I don't know. I remember. I think in my contemporary adult life, definitely being like that. I don't know exactly what I was like in my youth. I'll have to ask my parents about that to kind of see what their impressions are. But I think to some extent, I was quite a bit of a. I was happy in playing baseball and athletics and sports. But I think in some other context, I was quite anguished in academics. I struggled in my younger years, and have ADHD, so that's had an impact, and kind of skewed my experience growing up. So those are all things I'm working with in my life now. I think I'm doing quite well. Um, okay, so then we want to let me just kind of remind us where we're at. So that those were the conceptual foundations. So bullet point one, depression as existential crisis. Bullet point two, loss of meaning and possibility. Bullet point three, a restricted being in the world. Okay, so now core existential themes in depression. So we're gonna, I think I already hit on most of these. So we're gonna kind of go quickly through these, but thinking about freedom and responsibility. So there may be a avoidance of the anxiety that comes with freedom, which again leads to that feeling of stuckness. And I think a term that's used in some of the literature is resignation, if you will. Meaning and purpose, feelings of futility and emptiness point to the struggle with creating meaning in a different universe. So this is a tricky point, right? Because this is presenting more of, I think, in a atheistic view versus like a theistic view, which I tend to be more on the spiritual side. So the question is it an indifferent universe? I think it actually can be like a both and maybe. Like there's an indifference around the world I ideally goes on after Dr. John will eventually leave the Earth. I mean, the Earth isn't going to cease to rotate and make its way around the sun. People are going to live their lives, and everything moves on like that. So that's a kind of like indifference, right? But I believe in the kind of like a continuation of consciousness in a sense, if you will. Um, that could get into these notions of reincarnation. Are we kind of coming back around the next time to try to elevate our consciousness even further? We don't know the answer to those things, but I believe in maybe moving into like a spirit realm where communication with ancestors still occurs and is possible. I think we just have to be really looking for signs for that. For me, those show up in nature a lot, particularly with animals. I'll reflect on that in another video because I want to stay on point. So isolation and connection. So we talked about that gap between oneself and others. Primary way to kind of think about that is we're thrown into the world. Thrownness, Heidegger's concept there. Thrown into the world, and then we have to, or that notion of existence precedes essence. Okay, so thrown into the world, then I've got to order up my life and experience as I develop all of these functions. But ultimately, what I'm getting at there is thrown into the world in terms of like my own consciousness, right? Even say like the case of twins are brought into the world not quite exactly at the same time, but very close in proximity. But each one of those siblings, if you will, has an individual existence where there might be like this extra level of closeness between them as they move through life. But ultimately, there's an individual consciousness there that has this gap between ourselves and others. And certainly, we make our exit on an individual level. As far as we know, I mean, there's been horrible cases of. I don't even want to talk about this stuff, but we got to mention like mass casualties and other things where, like COVID recently, the pandemic, where I once heard, I think it was, she was a psychic. This was a video I saw on YouTube where she had this vision of like a sort of like massive exodus of souls leaving the earth, and lo and behold, that was before COVID, where that came into fruition. So I don't know that anybody, maybe some mediums or people can like speak to those things, but I think that from this existential standpoint, it's a solitary exit, if you will. Um, Death and finitude. Heightened awareness of mortality may underlie depressive despair. I hit on that earlier. Yeah, when you're in that depressive state, I think you're more in touch with mortality, and that's really hard to grasp. I think we have to ultimately make peace with that, and ideally, when we're moving through life, we've got to find a way to ultimately make peace with that, come into acceptance of that, live our lives authentically, right? So when that time does come towards the end, we know that, hey, I can look back at my life and feel a sense of integrity versus despair. This is Erickson stages. And also, there's that sense of I think just peacefulness, um, that's the key, a sense of satisfaction and completion, no unfinished business, so to speak, to whatever extent that's possible. So authenticity, yes. Of course, like, if we're living with a mask on, right, not being the authentic self, we're gonna end up in this place of uh, despair, really, because we're not bringing our true self forward. So conformity, like we're in with the herd, waiting in line. We're not bringing unique expression. We're not putting ourselves out there, taking those like healthy risks, in a sense, not exploring much. Okay. So those are our foundations, and the one aim on this channel is to keep things somewhat brief. So we've crossed the 21-minute mark. So we'll call this part one and end the video here. And then what's to come? Let me first just recap bullet points on conceptual foundations. Uh, bullet point one: depression as existential crisis. Bullet point two: loss of meaning and possibility. Bullet point three: restricted being in the world. Okay, what's to come in the next video? We'll get on. Actually, you know what? I messed up there. I repeated the bullet points on conceptual foundation, which isn't terrible. Let me repeat bullet points on core existential themes in depression: freedom and responsibilities, bullet point one. Bullet point two: meaning and purpose. Bullet point three: isolation and connection. Bullet point four: death and finitude. Bullet point five: authenticity. Topics to come in the next video. We'll talk some therapeutic stance, which is more of interest to psychotherapists. Practical interventions, again, of more interest to psychotherapists. What some goals might be when we're working in therapy. And then I also will do a follow-up video on the more like, from a person, client, patient standpoint, like, why does this stuff matter, right? Like, how can it help, essentially? How can this help me? Okay. So let's call it peace and love, everyone. I wish you joy. I wish you happiness. And I wish you this expanded awareness where you're in touch with these givens and living your life in a much more full and complete way, and being in a space of love and compassion. All right. See you next time.